Billionaire felt lost and alone on Christmas, until he saw his ex enter a cafe holding a baby. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. The streets of Manhattan wore their holiday costume with practiced elegance. Twinkling lights draped across storefronts, steam rising from hot dog carts, and the distant sound of Christmas carols drifting from department stores. But for Elliot Vance, the festive atmosphere felt like a mockery of his inner emptiness. At 43, Elliot had everything the world deemed successful. His data analytics empire had revolutionized corporate decision-making across 3 continents. Forbes had featured him twice. His penthouse overlooked Central Park. Yet as he walked aimlessly through the holiday crowds, designer coat unbuttoned despite the December cold, he felt more lost than ever. The therapy sessions weren't working. Dr. Martinez had suggested he reconnect with meaningful relationships, but Elliot couldn't remember what those felt like anymore. The anxiety medication dulled the sharp edges of panic but left everything else gray and muted. He paused at a crosswalk, watching families hurry past with wrapped packages and genuine smiles. A little girl in a red coat tugged her father's hand, pointing excitedly at a window display. The simple joy on her face made something twist painfully in Elliot's chest. The light changed, and he started across the street without really knowing where he was going. That's when he saw her. Clara Whitmore stood on the opposite sidewalk, a baby bundled against her chest in a navy blue carrier. Even from a distance, Elliot recognized the way she tucked her honey blonde hair behind her ear when concentrating, the graceful way she moved despite carrying the extra weight. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful, but motherhood had added something new, a quiet strength that radiated from her posture, the protective way she held the child, the confidence in her movements. Elliot's feet stopped moving. The crowd flowed around him like water around a stone. Clara pushed open the door to a small cafe called Rosie's Corner, its windows glowing warm against the cold morning. Through the glass, he could see her settling into a corner booth, unwrapping the baby from his winter layers. 2 years and 4 months. That's how long it had been since their last conversation, since he'd walked away from the best thing that had ever happened to him, because he'd been too afraid, too suspicious, too proud to believe in something real. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Car waiting for your 3 p.m. flight to Aspen. Confirmation needed. Elliot stared at the message. Another empty holiday in another empty place, surrounded by business associates who called him friend but only knew his bank account balance. He looked back at the cafe. Clara was laughing at something the baby had done, her whole face lighting up in a way that made Elliot's chest ache with memory. The child, a boy from what he could tell, had dark hair that caught the light just like Elliot's. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The timeline fit perfectly. The baby appeared to be around 21 months old, maybe a bit older. If Clara had been pregnant when they broke up. His hands trembled as he deleted the text without responding and crossed the street. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and fresh coffee. Christmas music played softly from speakers hidden somewhere in the exposed brick walls. Clara sat with her back to the door, speaking in gentle tones to the baby who was now free of his carrier, sitting on her lap and reaching for a small wooden toy. Elliot approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he was close enough to see the fine details, the baby's bright green eyes so similar to his own, the way Clara's fingers moved with maternal instinct, he finally spoke. Clara. She turned, and for a moment, time suspended itself between them. Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, something that might have been pain, and finally, a careful neutrality. Elliot. Her voice was calm, controlled. What are you doing here? The baby looked up at him with curious eyes, one small hand gripping Clara's sweater. Elliot felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. I was just walking. The words sounded pathetic even to him. And I saw you. Clara's expression didn't change, but he noticed her arms tighten protectively around the child. This is Theo, she said simply. Elliot stared at the boy, his son, if his suspicions were correct, and felt the last 2 years of his life reframe themselves entirely. Every empty morning, every meaningless business dinner, Every night he'd wondered what Clara was doing, where she was, if she was happy. She'd been raising their child. Alone. The question formed in his throat, but before he could ask it, Clara looked directly into his eyes with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked. "I think we have a lot to talk about. What choice would you have made in Elliot's position? To walk away again, or to face the consequences of the biggest mistake of your life?" Elliot slid into the booth across from Clara, his expensive wool coat suddenly feeling suffocating in the warm cafe. The wooden table between them felt like an ocean. Theo continued to play with his toy, occasionally glancing up at the stranger with bright, curious eyes that were undeniably familiar. "Coffee?" Clara asked, her tone polite but distant, as if they were acquaintances catching up rather than former lovers confronting 2 years of silence. "Please." Elliot's voice came out rougher than intended. Clara signaled to the waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who clearly knew her well. "The usual for me and a black coffee for my friend." Friend. The word stung more than Elliot expected. While they waited, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Theo filled the void with soft babbling sounds, occasionally offering his toy to Clara, who accepted it with gentle smiles and whispered words of encouragement. Elliot watched, transfixed. He'd never seen Clara in this role. Patient, nurturing, completely absorbed in someone else's needs. During their relationship, she'd been ambitious, driven, always thinking 3 steps ahead in her project analyses. Now, she seemed centered in a way that was entirely new. "He's beautiful," Elliot said quietly. Clara's hand stilled for a moment. "Thank you. How old is he?" 21 months. She met his eyes directly. Born April 15th, 2023. Elliot did the math quickly. If Theo was born in April 2023, Clara would have been about 7 weeks pregnant when they broke up in September 2022. The timeline fit perfectly, and from the steady way Clara held his gaze, she knew he was calculating. The waitress brought their drinks, a caramel latte for Clara and black coffee for Elliot. Steam rose between them like a physical manifestation of all the words they weren't saying. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question escaped before Elliot could stop it. Clara's laugh held no humor. "Tell you what exactly? You made it very clear that you thought I was lying about being pregnant, that it was some kind of manipulation." The memory hit him like a slap. He'd been so certain that Clara was trying to trap him, so convinced that successful women didn't actually want children. They just used pregnancy to secure wealthy men. His therapist had helped him understand where that toxic belief came from, but understanding didn't undo the damage. "I was wrong." The words felt inadequate. "Yes, you were." Clara lifted Theo onto her lap as he began to fuss. "But more than that, you didn't trust me. After 3 years together, you thought I was capable of lying about something that fundamental." Elliot watched as she expertly soothed the toddler, producing a small container of crackers from her bag. Theo immediately perked up, reaching for the snack with chubby fingers. "How have you been managing, financially, I mean? Did you get another job after you forced me to quit?" Clara's voice remained level, but Elliot caught the edge underneath. "I freelance now. Project consulting for smaller firms. It pays enough and I can work from home most days." Elliot felt sick. Clara had been one of the most talented analysts in his company. Her insights had saved his biggest clients millions in inefficient spending, and he'd let her walk away. No, he'd driven her away, because of his own paranoia and cowardice. "Clara, Mama, up," Theo interrupted, reaching his arms toward Clara's face. She stood smoothly, settling him against her hip. "He's getting tired. We should probably head home soon." "Wait." Elliot stood too, pulling out his wallet. "Let me pay for your coffee, please." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "It's $2.50, Elliot. I can handle it." The casual dismissal hit harder than any angry words could have. She wasn't bitter or vindictive. She was indifferent. She'd moved on so completely that his presence barely registered as significant. "I know you can handle it," he said. "I know you can handle everything. You always could. That's not why I'm offering." Something shifted in Clara's expression. She sat back down, adjusting Theo on her lap. "Then why are you offering?" Elliot sat across from her again, choosing his words carefully. "Because I spent 2 years wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, and now I know I did." Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Theo play with the cracker crumbs on the table. "He asks about his daddy sometimes," she said finally. "I tell him that some daddies live far away, but that doesn't mean they don't love their children." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow. "Clara, I never told him you didn't want him, Elliot. Even though that's what you made me believe. Theo chose that moment to look directly at Elliot, offering him a soggy piece of cracker with a generous smile. Without thinking, Elliot reached out and accepted it, his larger hand dwarfing the toddler's tiny fingers. "Da?" Theo said clearly, looking between Elliot and Clara with expectant eyes. Clara's face went pale. "He calls all men Da right now. He's not," but Elliot barely heard her explanation. He was staring into his son's face, his son, and feeling something crack open inside his chest that had been locked tight for 2 years. Theo giggled and reached for Elliot's expensive watch, his small fingers trying to grasp the metal band. And in that moment, Elliot understood that everything he thought mattered, the money, the empire, the success, was meaningless compared to what he'd walked away from. "I want to be in his life," he said quietly, still looking at Theo. "In both of your lives." Clara carefully moved Theo's hands away from the watch. When she looked up, her eyes were guarded but not entirely closed. "It's not that simple anymore, Elliot. You can't just decide you want to be a father when it's convenient for you." Clara's words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elliot felt the weight of every choice he'd made over the past 2 years pressing down on his shoulders. Theo had grown restless and was now standing on Clara's lap, his small hands pressed against the window, watching people walk by on the snowy sidewalk. "You're right," Elliot said finally. "It's not that simple. But Clara, I need you to understand something. I never stopped thinking about you. About us." Clara's jaw tightened. "Thinking isn't the same as acting, Elliot. You had my number. You knew where I worked before I left. If you wanted to find me, you could have. I thought you hated me. I did hate you." The admission was matter of fact, delivered without malice. "For about 6 months. Then I was too busy learning how to be a mother to waste energy on hate." Theo turned away from the window and reached for Clara's coffee cup. She smoothly moved it out of reach, replacing it with a sippy cup of water from her bag. The practiced motion spoke of countless similar moments, a routine built over months of just the two of them. "Tell me about him," Elliot said quietly. "What's he like?" Clara's expression softened slightly. "He's curious about everything. Yesterday he spent 20 minutes studying how the shadows moved across the kitchen floor. He loves music. Classical mostly. Mozart makes him giggle." "Mozart? I played it a lot when I was pregnant. Stressed out, you know. I read that classical music was supposed to be calming." She paused. "I was working 3 part-time jobs to save up for his arrival." The guilt hit Elliot like a physical weight. While Clara had been struggling to prepare for their child alone, he'd been attending galas and closing million-dollar deals, convincing himself he'd made the right choice. "He walks everywhere now," Clara continued, watching Theo with gentle eyes. "Refuses the stroller most of the time. Very independent. Stubborn, too. Wonder where he gets that from," Elliot said with a small smile. Clara shot him a look. "Careful. You're not allowed to make jokes yet." The rebuke stung, but it was fair. Elliot had no right to casual familiarity, no right to assume they could slip back into the easy banter that had once defined their relationship. Theo had grown tired of sitting still. He squirmed in Clara's arms, making soft, demanding sounds. "He needs to burn some energy," Clara explained, standing again. "There's a small playground 2 blocks from here. We usually stop by after coffee." She began packing up efficiently, sippy cup into the bag, toy into a side pocket, Theo's tiny jacket retrieved from under the table. Elliot watched her movements, noting how she'd learned to do everything one-handed while keeping Theo secure. "Can I walk with you?" he asked. "To the playground?" Clara hesitated. "Elliot, I don't want him getting attached to you if you're just going to disappear again." "I'm not going to disappear." "How can you be sure? You're probably flying somewhere tonight for some business meeting. Tomorrow you'll be back in your world and this will feel like a dream." Her words were uncomfortably close to the truth. His assistant was still waiting for confirmation about the Aspen trip. His phone had been buzzing with messages he'd been ignoring. "Cancel your flight." The words came out more forcefully than Elliot intended. Clara blinked, surprised by his vehemence. "What? Whatever you have planned for tonight, tomorrow, this week, cancel it. I want to spend time with him. With both of you." Clara studied his face carefully. "Elliot, you can't just—" "I can," he interrupted. "I own the company, remember? I can do whatever I want with my schedule. That's not what I meant, and you know it." She was right, of course. Money and power couldn't buy back 2 years of missed moments, couldn't undo the damage of his absence during the most important period of their son's early life. "Then tell me what I need to do," Elliot said. "Tell me how to make this right." Clara was quiet for a long moment, settling Theo into his carrier. The toddler protested briefly, then settled against her chest with a contented sigh. It's not about making it right, Elliot. It's about making it real. Theo doesn't need a father who shows up when he's feeling guilty and disappears when things get complicated. He needs consistency, reliability. I can be reliable. Can you? Because being a parent isn't about grand gestures. It's about 3 a.m. diaper changes and teething pain, and days when he's sick and cranky, and nothing you do makes it better. It's about choosing him over everything else, every single time. Elliot felt something shift inside him as she spoke. For the first time, he was beginning to understand what he'd really walked away from. Not just a woman he loved, but a partnership, a family, a purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or market dominance. I know I don't deserve a chance, he said, but I'm asking for one anyway. Clara moved toward the cafe door, and Elliot quickly stood to open it for her. The cold air hit them immediately, and she pulled Theo's hat down more securely over his ears. One afternoon, she said finally, at the playground. You can spend one afternoon with us, and we'll see how it goes. And after that, we'll talk. Really talk. About what this means, what you want, what I need. She looked directly at him. And what's best for Theo. As they started walking down the snowy sidewalk, Elliot felt his phone buzz again. This time, instead of ignoring it, he pulled it out and typed a quick message to his assistant. Cancel Aspen. Cancel everything this week. I'll explain later. Clara noticed the gesture. Second thoughts already? No, Elliot said, pocketing the phone. Just figuring out what my priorities should have been all along. But even as he said it, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was testing him, waiting for him to prove that he was exactly the man she remembered, the one who chose business over love, success over family. And the terrifying truth was, he wasn't entirely sure she was wrong. The small playground was nearly empty. Just a few determined parents bundled in winter coats watching their children brave the cold equipment. Snow had been cleared from the main walkways, but it still clung to the edges of the swing sets and monkey bars, creating a winter wonderland that seemed almost magical. Clara set Theo down on the rubber matting, and he immediately toddled toward a low climbing structure designed for toddlers. His movements were confident, but careful, and Elliot found himself holding his breath as the boy navigated the small steps. He's fearless, Elliot observed. Too fearless sometimes, Clara replied, staying close enough to catch Theo if he stumbled. Last week he tried to climb onto the kitchen counter to reach a cookie jar. I found him hanging from the cabinet handle. Elliot laughed, then caught himself. Sorry, I didn't mean... It's okay to laugh, Elliot. Parenthood has its funny moments too. Clara's tone was gentler than it had been in the cafe, though it was less funny at the time. They settled onto a bench where they could watch Theo explore. The toddler had discovered a tunnel and was crawling through it repeatedly, giggling each time he emerged on the other side. What else should I know about him? Elliot asked. His favorite foods, bedtime routine, things that scare him. Clara seemed surprised by the specificity of his questions. He loves pasta, any kind, and strawberries, but only if they're cut into small pieces. He's afraid of the vacuum cleaner but fascinated by the blender. She paused. He goes to bed at 7:30, has to have his stuffed elephant, and I read him 3 books. Always 3, never 2, never 4. Stuffed elephant? His name is Peanut. Theo's had him since he was 4 months old. Clara's voice softened. I bought it the day I found out we were having a boy. I was sitting in the doctor's office, alone, trying to figure out how I was going to do everything by myself. I saw this little elephant in the hospital gift shop, and something about its eyes reminded me of what? Of hope, I guess. Like maybe everything would be okay. Elliot felt the familiar twist of guilt in his chest. Clara had been facing the biggest change of her life alone while he'd been convincing himself he was protecting them both from a mistake. Theo had moved on to the swings and was standing next to them, looking back at Clara expectantly. Up, up, he called, reaching his arms toward the swing. Clara stood immediately, but Elliot was faster. Can I? Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Elliot approached Theo carefully, unsure of the mechanics of toddler handling. Hey, buddy. Want to swing? Theo looked up at him with those familiar green eyes and nodded enthusiastically. Up. Lifting Theo into the swing proved more complicated than Elliot expected. The boy was heavier than he looked, and getting him positioned correctly while he wiggled with excitement required a patience Elliot didn't know he possessed. Support his back, Clara instructed, and don't push too high. He likes the motion, but big swings scare him. Elliot began pushing gently, and Theo's delighted laughter filled the air. Each push brought a fresh giggle, and Elliot found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in years. More, more, Theo demanded when Elliot paused. He'll stay here all day if you let him, Clara warned, but she was smiling too. As Elliot continued the gentle rhythm of pushing the swing, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his business partner's name. Aren't you going to answer that? Clara asked when the ringing stopped. No. It might be important. Elliot looked at her seriously. This is important. The phone started ringing again, then again. After the fourth call, Clara sighed. Just answer it. I know how your world works, Elliot. Everything is urgent, everything is critical. Reluctantly, Elliot pulled out his phone. Marcus, whatever it is, where the hell are you? Marcus's voice was loud enough that Clara could hear it. The Yamamoto deal is falling apart. They want to move the presentation to tonight and you're nowhere to be found. I told Jennifer to cancel everything this week. Cancel everything? Elliot, this is a $40 million contract. You can't just... I can. And I did. Elliot watched Theo's face light up as the swing carried him forward. Handle it yourself or postpone it. Have you lost your mind? This company doesn't run itself. The company has been running fine for 15 years. It can survive a week without me micromanaging every detail. There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. What's going on with you? Marcus asked finally. You never take time off. You certainly never blow off major clients. Elliot glanced at Clara, who was listening to every word. I'm spending time with my son. Another long pause. You're what? I have a son, Marcus. I just found out today, and I'm not going to miss another minute of his life for a contract. Elliot, I think you need to... I need to go. We'll talk Monday. Elliot hung up and slipped the phone into his pocket. When he looked up, Clara was staring at him with an unreadable expression. Your business partner doesn't know about Theo, she observed. No one knows about Theo, because I didn't know about Theo, but they also don't know about me. They never did. The accusation hung between them. Clara was right. Even during their 3-year relationship, Elliot had kept their personal life completely separate from his professional one. He'd told himself it was to protect Clara from the scrutiny and pressure of being involved with him, but the truth was more complicated. I was protecting myself, he admitted. If no one knew about us, then losing you wouldn't feel like such a public failure. Clara lifted Theo out of the swing, and the toddler immediately ran toward the slide. So what's different now? Elliot watched his son climb the small ladder with determined focus. Now I understand that the only real failure was walking away in the first place. Pretty words, Elliot. But you've always been good with words. Before he could respond, Theo called out from the top of the slide. Mama, look. I see you, baby, Clara called back. Be careful. Theo slid down with pure joy, landing safely at the bottom and immediately running back to climb up again. He's incredible, Elliot said softly. Yes, he is. Clara's voice carried both pride and protectiveness. And he deserves a father who's proud enough to tell the world he exists. The afternoon had grown colder, and other families began leaving the playground. Theo's cheeks were pink from the winter air, but he showed no signs of slowing down. He'd discovered that he could make his footsteps crunch in the patches of snow around the equipment, and was marching back and forth with serious concentration. We should probably head home soon, Clara said, checking her watch. He'll need lunch and a nap, or he'll be impossible by dinner time. Where do you live? Elliot asked, realizing how little he knew about Clara's current life. Washington Heights. It's not much, but it's ours. Washington Heights. Elliot tried to hide his surprise. During their relationship, Clara had lived in a sleek apartment in Midtown that he'd helped her afford. Washington Heights was over an hour away by subway, in a neighborhood that, while improving, was hardly where he'd imagined her ending up. I had to move somewhere cheaper when I went freelance, Clara said, reading his expression correctly. But it's actually nice. There's a park nearby, good schools for when he's older, and our neighbors look out for each other. Theo, no. Clara's sharp voice cut through the air as the toddler had wandered toward the edge of the playground, where the snow was deeper. She hurried after him, scooping him up before he could fall into a drift. Elliot watched her handle the situation with practiced ease, brushing snow off Theo's mittens and distracting him with a song about snowflakes. Everything she did seemed effortless, but he was beginning to understand that it was the result of nearly 2 years of learning to be everything to their son. Let me drive you home, he offered as Clara began gathering their things. We take the subway. In this weather? With him? Clara paused in the middle of stuffing Theo's toys back into her bag. Elliot, We take the subway everywhere. Every day. It's not a hardship. It's just life. But Elliot was already pulling out his phone. My driver can be here in 5 minutes. Your driver? Clara's voice carried a note of disbelief. You have a driver now? I've had a driver for 3 years, since the company went international. Of course you have. She shook her head. Let me guess. You also have a chef, a housekeeper, and someone who picks out your clothes. Just the housekeeper, Elliot said, missing the sarcasm entirely. And my assistant handles most of the other arrangements. Clara stared at him for a moment, and Elliot realized how different their worlds had become. While she'd been learning to budget and take care of a baby alone, he'd been surrounding himself with people whose job it was to make sure he never had to handle the mundane details of life. We'll take the subway, Clara said firmly, like we always do. Then I'll come with you. Elliot, when's the last time I rode the subway? I want to see how you get around with him. Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but Theo had started fussing from being carried too long. Fine, but don't blame me when it's crowded and loud and nothing like your usual transportation. The nearest subway station was 6 blocks away, and the walk there proved more challenging than Elliot had anticipated. Clara navigated expertly with the stroller she'd retrieved from a nearby bike rack, but Elliot found himself struggling to keep up while dodging other pedestrians and patches of ice. How do you do this every day? He asked, slightly out of breath. You adapt. You learn to plan for extra time, to pack emergency snacks, to find the elevators instead of stairs. Clara maneuvered the stroller around a construction barrier with ease. You figure it out because you have to. The subway platform was crowded with holiday shoppers and tourists. When their train arrived, it was nearly full, and Elliot watched in amazement as Clara efficiently folded the stroller one-handed while holding Theo, then found them seats in the packed car. "Mama, loud!" Theo complained, covering his ears as the train lurched into motion. "I know, baby. We'll be home soon." Clara produced a small book from her bag and began reading to him quietly, her voice somehow audible to Theo despite the noise around them. Elliot sat beside them, hyper-aware of the contrast between this crowded, noisy reality and the quiet luxury of his usual car rides through the city. A businessman across the aisle was talking loudly on his phone about quarterly projections. A group of teenagers was playing music from a portable speaker. An elderly woman was struggling with heavy shopping bags. 3 stops into the ride, Theo began crying, not fussing, full-blown, exhausted tears that cut through all the other noise. "He's overtired," Clara explained, trying unsuccessfully to soothe him. "This is why we usually do the playground in the morning." People were staring, some with sympathy, others with obvious annoyance. Elliot felt a surge of protective anger at the disapproving looks directed at Clara and Theo. "Here." Elliot stood up and gently took Theo from Clara's arms. The toddler was too tired to protest being held by someone less familiar. "Shh," Elliot murmured, rocking slightly. "It's okay, buddy." To everyone's surprise, including Elliot's, Theo's crying began to subside. He laid his head against Elliot's shoulder with a shuddering sigh. "He likes you," an elderly woman across the aisle said with a kind smile. "Babies know good hearts." Clara looked up at Elliot with an expression he couldn't quite read. "He doesn't usually go to strangers when he's upset." "Maybe I'm not a stranger," Elliot said softly. The rest of the ride passed quietly, with Theo dozing against Elliot's shoulder. When their stop arrived, Clara had to wake him gently to get him back in the stroller. Washington Heights was different from what Elliot had expected. The streets were cleaner than he'd imagined, lined with small businesses and cafes. Children played in pocket parks while their parents chatted on benches. It felt like a real neighborhood, not just a place people slept between jobs. "This is us," Clara said, stopping in front of a pre-war building with a recently renovated entrance. Elliot looked up at the 5-story structure. "Which floor?" "4th. No elevator." Before he could respond, the building's front door opened and a woman in her 60s emerged, carrying grocery bags. "Clara, perfect timing. I was just bringing up some extra cookies from my baking marathon." The woman's eyes moved to Elliot with curious interest. "And who's this handsome stranger?" "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Elliot." "Elliot, my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She watches Theo sometimes when I have client meetings." "Elliot," Mrs. Rodriguez repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to this little angel?" Clara's face flushed slightly. "He's Theo's father." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose, but her smile remained warm. "Well, it's about time we met you. This little boy talks about his daddy all the time." Elliot felt something shift in his chest. "He does?" "Oh, yes." Clara's done a beautiful job making sure he knows he's loved from both sides, even when one side wasn't here to show it. The words hung in the cold air as Clara fumbled for her keys, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "We should get Theo upstairs," she said quickly. "He needs lunch." "Of course, dear." Mrs. Rodriguez handed Clara a container of cookies. "And Elliot, you're welcome here any time. This building takes care of its own." As they climbed the 4 flights of stairs, Elliot carrying the stroller while Clara carried Theo, he realized that Clara hadn't just built a new life for herself and their son. She'd built a community, a support system, a world where Theo was known and loved by people who had no obligation to care about him, except that they'd chosen to, and Elliot had missed all of it. Clara's apartment was smaller than Elliot had imagined, but it was undeniably a home. The living room was painted a warm yellow with children's books stacked neatly on low shelves, and Theo's toys organized in colorful bins. Artwork clearly made by tiny hands was taped to the refrigerator, and family photos, just Clara and Theo, lined the windowsill. "It's beautiful," Elliot said and meant it. "It's small," Clara replied, lifting Theo out of his carrier. "But it works for us." Theo immediately toddled toward his toy bin, chattering happily as he dug through his treasures. Elliot watched, fascinated by how completely at ease his son was in this space. "Would you like some coffee?" Clara asked, moving toward the small kitchen. "I was going to make lunch anyway. Let me help." Clara paused, clearly unused to having assistance with daily routines. "You don't have to." "I want to." Elliot removed his coat, hanging it carefully on a hook by the door. "What can I do?" "Honestly? You can sit with Theo while I make his sandwich. He gets into everything if he's not supervised." Elliot settled on the carpet beside their son, who immediately showed him a wooden train with serious concentration. "Choo-choo," Theo announced solemnly. "Very nice choo-choo," Elliot agreed. "Does it go fast?" Theo pushed the train across the carpet, making engine noises that sounded remarkably realistic for a toddler. When it crashed into Elliot's leg, Theo dissolved into giggles. "Again!" he demanded. For the next 10 minutes, Elliot found himself completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of making his son laugh. Each crash of the wooden train brought fresh delight, and Theo's uninhibited joy was infectious. "He really likes you," Clara observed from the kitchen where she was cutting a sandwich into precise small pieces. "The feeling is mutual." "Elliot," Clara's voice carried a note of warning. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Not to him. Before Elliot could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was his assistant. "I should take this," he said apologetically. "Jennifer never calls unless it's urgent." "Elliot, thank God." Jennifer's voice was strained. "Marcus is having a meltdown about the Yamamoto situation. They're threatening to walk entirely if we don't have the presentation ready by tomorrow morning." "Then let them walk." "What?" Jennifer sounded genuinely shocked. "Sir, this contract represents nearly 12% of our projected quarterly revenue." Elliot watched Theo carefully stack blocks, his small tongue sticking out in concentration. "Jennifer, have I ever asked you about your family?" "My... what?" "Your family. Do you have children?" "Yes, sir, 2 daughters. But I don't understand. How old are they?" 8 and 11. "Mr. Vance, I really think we should focus on, when's the last time you saw them? Really saw them, not just rushed past them on your way to handle one of my emergencies." There was a long pause. Yesterday was my youngest daughter's school play. I missed it because of the Chen Industries crisis." "Go home, Jennifer. Spend the evening with your daughters. The Yamamoto deal will either wait or it won't. Either way, the world won't end." "Sir, I don't think you're thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Go home." Elliot hung up and found Clara staring at him with an unreadable expression. "That was quite a speech for someone who used to work Christmas Day," she said quietly. "Theo, lunchtime," Clara called, and their son immediately abandoned his blocks and climbed into his high chair with practiced efficiency. Elliot watched Clara navigate the lunch routine, cutting grapes into quarters, warming milk to exactly the right temperature, patiently wiping Theo's face between bites. Everything was choreographed from months of practice. "How do you do it?" Elliot asked. "All of this every day by yourself?" "You learn," Clara said simply. "The first few months were hard. I cried a lot. Mrs. Rodriguez practically saved my sanity. She'd take Theo for an hour so I could shower, or she'd bring me soup when I was too exhausted to cook. You should have called me." Clara's hand stilled on Theo's sippy cup. "Called you?" "Elliot, you made it very clear that you thought I was lying about being pregnant. What exactly would I have said? Hello? Remember me?" The manipulative woman who tried to trap you? Well, it turns out I actually was pregnant, just like I told you. The bitterness in her voice was the first real emotion she'd shown since they'd sat down in the cafe that morning. I was wrong, Elliot said quietly. About everything. About you. About what you wanted. About what kind of person you are. Yes, you were. Clara's voice was matter of fact. But being wrong doesn't undo 2 years, Elliot. It doesn't give me back the nights I spent awake worrying about money, or the times I had to take Theo to the emergency room alone, or the moments when I was so tired I could barely stand, but he needed me anyway. Theo, oblivious to the tension, was happily smearing peanut butter across his high-chair tray. Tell me, Elliot said. Tell me what I missed. Clara was quiet for a moment, wiping Theo's hands with a patience that spoke of endless repetition. His first word was mama, obviously, but his second word was dada. He said it at 9 months, pointing at a picture I'd shown him of you. I cried for an hour. Elliot's chest tightened. You showed him pictures of me? Of course I did. Just because you weren't here doesn't mean I wanted him to grow up thinking his father didn't exist. Clara's voice softened slightly. He took his first steps at 11 months, right here in this living room. He was trying to reach a balloon that had floated to the ceiling. I called Mrs. Rodriguez to witness it because I couldn't stand the thought of no one else seeing such a huge moment. Clara, his first fever was at 14 months. I sat up with him all night in the emergency room because his temperature hit 103 and I was terrified. The doctor said it was just a virus, but I had no one to tell me it would be okay. No one to share the worry with. Each memory was like a physical blow. Elliot had been living his life, building his empire, attending business dinners, while Clara had been experiencing every milestone, every fear, every triumph alone. I'm sorry, he said, but the words felt hollow. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Clara said, lifting Theo out of his high chair and beginning to clean the inevitable mess. I'm telling you because you need to understand what parenting actually means. It's not just the cute moments at the playground. It's all of it. Theo, full and content, toddled back toward his toys. Within minutes, he was curled up on his small couch with his stuffed elephant, his eyes growing heavy. Nap time, Clara explained quietly. He'll sleep for about 2 hours. She gently carried Theo to what Elliot assumed was his bedroom, and he could hear her soft voice singing a lullaby through the thin walls. When she returned, the apartment felt different, quieter, more intimate. Clara settled onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. This is what most afternoons look like, she said. Quiet. Sometimes I read, sometimes I catch up on work. Sometimes I just sit here and try to remember who I was before I became someone's entire world. Elliot sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. Do you ever regret it? Having him? Clara's response was immediate and fierce. Never. Not once. He's the best thing I've ever done. The best thing I'll ever do. She paused. But do I sometimes wonder what my life would have looked like if you'd stayed? If we'd figured it out together? Yes. We could still figure it out. Clara turned to look at him directly. Could we? Because this isn't a romantic movie, Elliot. You can't just show up after 2 years and expect everything to fall back into place. I've built a life that works. Theo has a routine, a community, a sense of security. I won't let you disrupt that unless you're absolutely certain you're ready to be part of it permanently. I am certain. Are you? Because when your phone rang during lunch, I saw the look on your face. For just a second, you were torn. Part of you wanted to take control of that situation, to fix the crisis, to be the man who saves the day. She was right, and they both knew it. The pull of his old life, the addiction to being needed, to being in control, it wasn't something that would disappear overnight. I won't lie to you, Elliot said finally. This is all new to me. I don't know how to be a father, how to put someone else's needs first every single day, but I want to learn. Wanting isn't enough, Elliot. Theo needs more than good intentions. The afternoon light filtering through Clara's windows had grown softer, casting long shadows across the small living room. Elliot found himself studying the details he'd missed earlier, the carefully arranged children's books, all with worn spines from repeated reading, the small basket of clean laundry waiting to be folded, the subtle signs of a life lived on a careful budget. Can I ask you something? Elliot said quietly, not wanting to wake Theo. When you found out you were pregnant, what did you hope would happen? Clara was silent for so long that Elliot thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I hoped you'd be happy. I actually thought you might propose. The admission hung between them like a confession. I had this fantasy, Clara continued, staring at her hands. You'd come home from work, I'd tell you, and your whole face would light up. You'd pick me up and spin me around and start talking about baby names and cribs and all the things we'd teach him. Clara, instead, you looked at me like I'd just told you I had a terminal illness. Elliot closed his eyes, remembering that moment with painful clarity. Clara had been standing in his kitchen still wearing her work clothes, her face glowing with nervous excitement, and his first thought hadn't been joy or wonder. It had been trap. I was scared, he said. I'd never wanted children. I thought I'd be terrible at it, that I'd end up like my father. Your father? It was Clara's turn to look surprised. In 3 years together, Elliot had rarely mentioned his family. He was never home, always traveling, always working, always putting business first. When he was around, he treated my mother and me like obligations to be managed, rather than people to be loved. Elliot's voice was steady, but Clara could hear the old pain underneath. I swore I'd never put a family through that. So you decided not to have a family at all? I thought it was better than having one and failing them. Clara turned to face him fully. Elliot, you do realize that walking away from your pregnant girlfriend is exactly what an absent father would do? The words hit like a physical slap. Elliot had spent 2 years telling himself he'd made the noble choice, protecting Clara and their unborn child from his inevitable failures. He'd never considered that abandonment itself was the failure. I know that now, he said quietly. But at the time, all I could think about was how my father's presence had felt like an absence anyway. At least if I wasn't there, I couldn't disappoint anyone. You did disappoint us, though, just in a different way. The sound of Theo stirring came from the bedroom, followed by soft babbling. Clara glanced toward the sound but didn't move immediately. He usually plays quietly for a few minutes when he wakes up, she explained. It gives me time to finish whatever I'm doing. Even that you do alone. I've gotten used to it. Clara's voice carried a note of resignation. You adapt to what you have to. Elliot's phone buzzed with a text message, then another. He could feel Clara watching as the notifications continued. Your empire is crumbling without you, she observed. Let it crumble. But even as he said it, Elliot felt the familiar itch of unresolved problems. Decisions waiting to be made, fires that needed putting out, people depending on him to have answers. Mama! Theo's voice called from the bedroom, more insistent now. Clara stood to get him, but Elliot was already moving. Can I? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Theo's bedroom was smaller than Elliot's walk-in closet, but every inch was thoughtfully used. A crib converted to a toddler bed sat against one wall, surrounded by soft toys and children's books. The walls were painted a gentle green, with hand-painted animals that Clara had clearly done herself. Hey, buddy, Elliot said softly. Theo looked up from where he was sitting with his stuffed elephant, his hair mussed from sleep. Dada? The word hit Elliot like lightning. Not da this time, but the full word, said with such casual certainty that it took his breath away. Yes, Elliot managed. I'm your Dada. Theo held up his arms to be picked up, and Elliot lifted him carefully. The toddler was warm and soft from sleep, and he settled against Elliot's chest with complete trust. Elephant, Theo announced, showing Elliot his beloved Peanut. That's a very nice elephant. What's his name? Peanut. Hello, Peanut. Theo giggled and pressed the stuffed animal against Elliot's face. Peanut kiss. The simple gesture nearly undid Elliot completely. This little boy, who had never known him, was offering the pure, uncomplicated love that children gave so freely. No conditions, no expectations of perfection, no fear of disappointment. When they returned to the living room, Clara was folding the laundry with mechanical precision. She looked up as they entered, and Elliot saw something in her expression shift. He called me Dada, Elliot said quietly. I heard. Clara's voice was carefully neutral. He's been doing that with most men lately. The mailman, Mrs. Rodriguez's son, the guy who works at the grocery store. The words deflated Elliot's moment of wonder, but he understood Clara's need to protect both of them from false hope. Theo squirmed to get down and immediately toddled to his toy bin. He emerged with a small photo album and brought it to Elliot. Book, he announced. Elliot opened the album and felt his heart stop. Every page contained photos of Theo at different stages, as a newborn taking his first bath, sitting up, crawling, taking tentative steps, and on several pages, there were pictures of Elliot himself, clearly taken from his company website or social media. Clara, I told you I showed him pictures, she said defensively. I didn't want him to think his father was imaginary. Theo pointed to one of the photos of Elliot. Dada work. That's right, baby. Dada works. Dada home? The question, asked with such innocent hope, created a silence that stretched uncomfortably. Clara and Elliot looked at each other across the room, and Elliot realized they'd reached the moment of truth. "I don't know, sweetheart," Clara said gently. "We'll have to see." But Theo had already moved on, distracted by a toy car. The adults, however, remained frozen in the weight of the question. "He's going to ask that question more and more," Clara said quietly. "And eventually I'll have to give him a real answer." "The answer is yes," Elliot said. "I want to come home. I want this to be my home too." "Wanting isn't enough, remember?" Clara resumed folding laundry. "You have a life, Elliot. An entire world that revolves around you being available, being in control, being the man with all the answers. How do you reconcile that with bath time and story time and waking up at 2 a.m. because someone had a nightmare? I'll figure it out. What if you can't? What if 6 months from now you realize that fatherhood is harder than you thought, that the sacrifices are bigger than you imagined? What happens to Theo then?" Elliot sat on the floor beside his son, who was now making elaborate crash sounds with his toy cars. "I won't abandon him again." "You can't promise that." "Not really. Because you don't know what you're promising." Clara finished folding the last item of laundry and sat back down on the couch. "There's something else you need to know. Something I probably should have told you earlier." The seriousness in her voice made Elliot look up sharply. "What?" Clara took a deep breath. "I've been seeing someone." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow. He froze, his hands still on the toy car Theo had handed him, his mind struggling to process what Clara had just said. "You're seeing someone," he repeated slowly. "His name is David. He's a teacher at the elementary school a few blocks away." Clara's voice was steady, but Elliot could see the tension in her shoulders. "We've been dating for about 8 months. 8 months. While Elliot had been going through the motions of his empty life, Clara had been building something new with someone else. Someone who was probably everything Elliot wasn't. Present, reliable, good with children. "Does he know about me?" Elliot asked. "He knows Theo's father wasn't in the picture. He doesn't know the details." "And Theo?" Clara glanced at their son, who was obliviously playing with his cars. "David comes over sometimes for dinner. Theo likes him. He's good with kids. It's his job." Of course he was good with kids. Of course he was exactly what Clara and Theo needed. "Are you—" Elliot's voice came out rougher than intended. "Are you serious about him?" Clara was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "He's a good man, Elliot. He's kind and patient, and he shows up when he says he will. He's never once made me feel like loving him was a burden." The implication hung heavy in the air. "Unlike you. But you don't love him." It wasn't a question. Elliot could see the answer in the way Clara couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Love isn't everything," Clara said finally. "Security matters. Stability matters. Theo deserves a father figure who won't disappear when things get difficult." "I told you I wouldn't." "You told me a lot of things 3 years ago, too." Clara's voice sharpened. "You told me you loved me. You told me we had a future. You told me I was the most important thing in your world. Right up until the moment I needed you to prove it." Theo chose that moment to toddle over to Elliot, offering him another car. "Crash," he announced happily, apparently wanting to stage another elaborate accident. Elliot took the car, but his heart wasn't in the game anymore. Everything felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life unfold. "When do I meet him?" Elliot asked quietly. "You don't." Clara stood and began putting away the folded laundry. "This situation is complicated enough without adding more variables. He's going to be around my son. I think I have a right to know what kind of man he is." "Your son?" Clara turned to face him, her eyes flashing. "You can't just show up after 2 years and start making demands about who's in Theo's life. David has been here for 8 months. He's read Theo bedtime stories, taken him to the doctor when he had an ear infection, taught him to count to 10. Where were you?" The accusation stung because it was completely fair. Elliot had no right to feel territorial about a man who had been stepping up while he'd been absent. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have no claim to anything here. But Clara, I meant what I said. I want to be part of his life." "And what about David? Do I just tell him that Theo's father has suddenly decided to appear and everything needs to change?" Before Elliot could answer, there was a knock at the door. Clara glanced at the clock, and her face went pale. "That's him," she said quietly. "David. He's picking me up for dinner tonight. Mrs. Rodriguez is babysitting." The knock came again, followed by a male voice. "Clara, it's me." Clara looked between Elliot and the door, clearly torn. "This is not how I wanted this to happen." "Clara?" David's voice carried a note of concern now. "Is everything okay?" "I should go." Elliot said, standing quickly. No. Clara's voice was firm. Running away is what got us into this mess in the first place. If you're serious about being part of Theo's life, then you're going to have to deal with the reality of what that life looks like. She walked to the door and opened it, revealing a man in his early 30s with kind brown eyes and an easy smile. David was exactly what Elliot had expected. Approachable, unpretentious, the kind of man who probably volunteered on weekends and remembered birthdays. Hey, David said, leaning in to kiss Clara's cheek. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Traffic was... He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed Elliot standing in the living room. David, this is Elliot, Clara said, her voice carefully controlled. Theo's father. David's expression went through several changes. Surprise, confusion, and finally, a cautious wariness. Oh, hello, Elliot replied. The two men looked at each other across the small apartment, and Elliot felt like he was seeing himself through David's eyes. The expensive suit, the obvious wealth, the man who had everything but had still walked away from his family. Theo, oblivious to the tension, toddled over to David with a bright smile. Davy! David's face immediately softened as he crouched down to Theo's level. Hey, buddy, did you have a good day? Playground, Theo announced proudly. Swing! That sounds awesome. Did you go with Mama? Dada too. Theo pointed enthusiastically at Elliot. David's eyes flicked to Clara, clearly looking for an explanation. The word Dada had obviously never come up before. It's complicated, Clara said quietly. I can see that. David straightened, his teacher's composure serving him well. Maybe I should come back later. Give you time to... No, Clara said quickly. We still have dinner plans. Elliot was just leaving. But Elliot wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Not when he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd lost and what stood in the way of getting it back. Actually, he said, I was hoping we could continue our conversation tomorrow. About arrangements, visitation, how this is going to work. David looked between Clara and Elliot, clearly trying to piece together the situation. You're planning to be involved now? After I made the biggest mistake of my life, Elliot said simply. Yes. Clara closed her eyes briefly, and Elliot could see her trying to calculate the implications, the complications, the ways this could all go wrong. This is a lot to process, she said finally. Can we talk tomorrow? After I've had time to think? Of course. Elliot moved toward the door but paused beside Theo, who was showing David his toy cars. Bye, buddy. Bye, Dada. Theo waved enthusiastically. David's face went through another series of emotions at hearing Theo use that word so naturally. As Elliot reached the door, Clara caught his arm. Elliot, whatever happens, whatever we decide, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm not trying to make anything hard. I'm just trying to make it right. Right for who? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to turn 3 stable lives upside down because you've suddenly decided you want to be a father. The accusation hit home because there was truth in it. Elliot was asking Clara to disrupt the life she'd built, to risk the security she'd found, to trust him with her heart and their son's future, and he had no guarantee he wouldn't let them down again. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, he said quietly, but I'm asking anyway. As Elliot walked down the 4 flights of stairs, he could hear David's voice through the thin walls, asking gentle questions. Clara's responses were too quiet to make out, but the tone suggested a long, difficult conversation ahead. By the time Elliot reached the street, snow had begun falling again, and the Christmas lights in the windows around him seemed to mock his empty apartment waiting across town. Elliot's penthouse felt like a museum after Clara's warm, lived-in apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Manhattan's skyline, but tonight the twinkling lights only reminded him of everything he was missing. He stood at the window with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, replaying every moment of the day. His phone had been buzzing constantly since he'd arrived home. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, and 12 emails marked urgent. The Yamamoto deal had indeed fallen through. Marcus was threatening to call an emergency board meeting. His assistant Jennifer had sent increasingly frantic messages about meetings he'd missed and decisions that couldn't wait. None of it mattered. For the first time in his adult life, Elliot understood the difference between success and fulfillment. He'd built an empire, but he'd never built a home. His phone rang again. This time it was his therapist, Dr. Martinez, returning the call he'd made an hour earlier. Elliot, you said it was urgent. What's going on? I found them, Elena. I found Clara and my son. There was a pause. Your son? Elliot, you told me Clara wasn't actually pregnant. I was wrong. About everything. Elliot sank into his leather chair, suddenly exhausted. He's beautiful, Elena. He's almost 2 years old, and he's perfect, and he doesn't know me at all. How are you feeling? Like I've been living someone else's life for the past 2 years. Like I threw away the only thing that ever mattered because I was too scared to believe it was real. And Clara? How is she? Elliot closed his eyes. She's incredible. She's raised him alone. Built a whole life. A community. She's stronger than I ever gave her credit for. But there's someone else, another man. Someone who's been there for them when I wasn't. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. How does that make you feel? Furious. Heartbroken. Terrified that I'm too late. Elliot's voice cracked slightly. But also, grateful. Grateful that someone was taking care of them when I couldn't get past my own fear. What do you want to do? I want my family back. I want to be the man they deserved all along. And what's stopping you? Elliot looked around his empty apartment. All glass and steel and expensive emptiness. I don't know if I can be. Elena, I've spent 2 years telling myself that walking away was noble, that I was protecting them from my inevitable failures. But the truth is I was protecting myself. I was so afraid of becoming my father that I became exactly like him. Elliot, you're not your father, aren't I? He chose work over family every single day. He made my mother feel like she was competing with his business for his attention, and she always lost. But you're here now. You're choosing differently, for one day. But what about tomorrow? What about when the next crisis hits? When someone needs me to make a decision that affects thousands of jobs? What about when Theo is sick and I have to choose between a board meeting and staying home with him? What do you think you'd choose? The answer came without hesitation. Theo. I'd choose Theo every time. Then why don't you believe that? Before Elliot could answer, his doorman called to announce a visitor. Clara was downstairs. Elena, I have to go. Elliot, remember, you can't control the past, but you can choose your future. The question is, what future do you want? Elliot ended the call and told the doorman to send Clara up. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the elevator. What was she doing here? Where was David? Where was Theo? When the elevator opened, Clara stepped out looking exhausted and determined. She was still wearing the same clothes from earlier, but her hair was slightly mussed and her eyes carried the weight of a difficult evening. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Of course. Come in. Elliot stepped aside, watching as Clara took in his apartment. He tried to see it through her eyes. The designer furniture, the abstract art, the complete absence of anything personal or warm. Theo's with Mrs. Rodriguez, Clara said, settling carefully on the edge of his pristine sofa. And David and I had a long conversation. About me. About everything. Clara's voice was steady, but Elliot could see the emotion underneath. He's a good man, Elliot. He deserves honesty, and he deserves better than being caught in the middle of this mess. What did you tell him? The truth. About us. About why you left, about how I felt when you walked away. Clara's voice caught slightly. About how I still feel. Elliot sat across from her, afraid to hope. How do you still feel? Confused, angry, scared. Clara met his eyes directly. And despite everything, despite all the reasons I shouldn't, I still love you. The words hung in the air between them like a gift and a burden. But love isn't enough anymore, Clara continued. Not when there's Theo to consider. Not when I've learned to live without you. What about David? Clara was quiet for a moment. David asked me to marry him tonight. Elliot felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Tonight? He's been planning it for weeks. He had a ring, a speech about building a family together, about giving Theo the stable father he deserves. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. And I couldn't say yes. Because of me? Because of you? Because seeing you with Theo today reminded me of what I'd always hoped for. Because I realized that I've been settling for safe instead of fighting for what I really want. Elliot's heart was racing, but he forced himself to stay still, to let Clara say whatever she'd come to say. But I need you to understand something, Clara continued, her voice growing stronger. If we do this, if we try again, it's not going to be the same as before. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I'm a mother now. Theo comes first, always. And I won't tolerate being anyone's secret again. You won't be. I need more than words, Elliot. I need actions. I need proof that you're ready to be the man Theo needs, the partner I need. Tell me what I need to do. Clara stood and walked to his window, looking out at the same view that had felt so empty to him moments earlier. I don't know yet, but I know what I need to see. I need to see you choose us when it's hard. When choosing us costs you something you think you can't afford to lose. The business? Maybe. Or maybe it's something else. But until you figure out what matters most to you, really matters, we can't move forward. Clara moved toward the elevator, then paused. David is staying at his sister's tonight. He needs time to process everything, and honestly, so do I. Clara, wait. Elliot stood quickly. What happens now? Now you decide who you want to be. And I decide whether I can trust you with our hearts again. The elevator doors opened and Clara stepped inside. As they began to close, she looked directly at Elliot. The man I fell in love with 3 years ago would have fought for us. He would have chosen love over fear, family over everything else. If that man still exists, then prove it. The doors closed, leaving Elliot alone with the weight of her challenge and the echo of possibility hanging in the air. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp. Elliot sat in his home office at 6:30, staring at the agenda that would determine the future of Vance Industries. The Yamamoto deal collapse had triggered a domino effect. 3 other major clients were reconsidering their contracts. The stock price had dropped 12% overnight, and the board was questioning his leadership for the first time in 15 years. Marcus had been brutally clear in his 5 a.m. phone call. Show up and take control or they'll vote you out by noon. Everything Elliot had built, everything he'd worked for, hung in the balance. It was exactly the kind of crisis that had always energized him before. High stakes, clear objectives, his expertise needed to save the day. But this morning, all he could think about was Theo calling him Dada, and Clara's words, "If that man still exists, then prove it." His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Car waiting downstairs, don't blow this." Instead of getting dressed, Elliot walked to his window and looked out at the city waking up below. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably making Theo breakfast, helping him get ready for another day in his small but love-filled world. David was staying at his sister's, nursing a broken heart that Elliot had caused. And Theo was living his life without knowing that his father was about to make the most important decision of any of their lives. Elliot picked up his phone and called Jennifer. "Thank God," his assistant answered. "The car's waiting. The presentation materials are ready, and I've briefed the entire executive team. We can still salvage this if you..." "Jennifer, I need you to do something for me." "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "I need you to prepare my resignation letter." There was complete silence on the other end of the line. "Sir, I think there might be a bad connection. Did you say resignation?" "I did. Effective immediately. I'm recommending Marcus for interim CEO, and I want my shares placed in trust for my son, Theodore Whitmore Vance." "Mr. Vance, you're not thinking clearly. You're upset about the board meeting, but we can fix this. You always fix this." "I don't want to fix this, Jennifer. For the first time in my life, I want to walk away from something that's wrong instead of fighting to save it." "But sir, this is your entire life." "No," Elliot said firmly. "This was my entire life. But my actual life is a 21-month-old boy who thinks elephants are the most important creatures on earth, and a woman who deserves a partner who puts her first, not a man who treats her like a priority, only when it's convenient." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "What should I tell the board?" "Tell them that effective immediately, Elliot Vance is choosing his family." Elliot hung up and finally got dressed, not in his usual armor of expensive suits, but in jeans and a sweater, clothes for playing on playgrounds and reading bedtime stories. By the time he reached Washington Heights, it was nearly 9 a.m. The board meeting would be starting without him, and by noon, his business empire would officially belong to someone else. He'd never felt lighter in his life. Mrs. Rodriguez answered her door with a knowing smile. "She's not here, mijo. She took Theo to the park about an hour ago. The one with the big climbing structure. You know the one?" Elliot found them at the far end of Riverside Park, where a large playground buzzed with morning activity. Clara was sitting on a bench, watching Theo navigate a climbing structure designed for slightly older children with determined concentration. "Careful, baby," she called softly. "Hold on tight." Elliot approached slowly, not wanting to startle either of them. When Clara saw him, her expression was carefully neutral. "You're not dressed for a board meeting," she observed. "That's because I'm not going to a board meeting." Elliot sat beside her on the bench, close enough to catch Theo if he fell, far enough away to give Clara space. "I resigned this morning." Clara turned to stare at him. "You what?" "I called Jennifer at 6:30 this morning and told her to prepare my resignation letter. By now Marcus is probably interim CEO, and I'm officially unemployed." "Elliot, that's insane. You can't just— Mama, look, Theo's voice interrupted, and they both turned to see him waving from the top of the climbing structure, beaming with pride. I see you, sweetheart. You're so brave, Clara called back, but her eyes never left Elliot's face. You can't throw away everything you've built. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing something better. Elliot watched Theo carefully make his way across a rope bridge. Clara, 3 days ago, I thought success meant being indispensable to everyone except the people who mattered most. I thought providing meant being absent, that loving you meant protecting you from my failures instead of fighting to be worthy of you. Clara's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained cautious. Pretty words again, Elliot. Then let me show you actions. Elliot pulled out his phone and opened a real estate app. I've been looking at apartments in this neighborhood since 7 a.m. 3-bedroom places, all within walking distance of Theo's playground, all with good schools nearby. Clara's breath caught slightly. Elliot, I know you need more than grand gestures. I know I have to prove myself over time, day by day, diaper by diaper, bedtime story by bedtime story. Elliot's voice was steady but intense. But I also know that I love you both more than I love being important to people who don't actually need me. Theo had made it across the rope bridge and was now sliding down a spiral slide, his laughter carrying across the playground. What about money? You can't just live without income. I have enough saved to last several lifetimes. And honestly, I'm thinking about teaching. Teaching? Business courses, maybe at the community college. Something where I can use what I know to help people build their own dreams instead of just making rich people richer. Elliot smiled slightly. Besides, someone once told me that teachers are good with kids. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Theo run toward them with his arms outstretched. Mama Dada, he called happily. Up. Elliot lifted Theo into his arms, and the toddler immediately began chattering about his climbing adventure. As Clara listened to them interact, Elliot could see her careful walls beginning to crack. This is terrifying, she said quietly. I know. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail, and Theo gets hurt in the process? Then we'll handle it together. All of it. The failures, the successes, the 3 a.m. fevers, the first days of school, the teenage years when he hates us both. Elliot met her eyes directly. Clara, I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'll be here. Every day for everything for as long as you'll let me. Clara reached out and touched Theo's hand, and the little boy immediately grabbed her finger with his free hand, connecting the three of them in a circle. David deserves an answer, she said softly. He does, and he deserves someone who can love him the way he deserves to be loved. And you think that someone is you? For me? Elliot looked at the woman who had changed his entire understanding of what mattered, holding the son who had shown him what love without conditions looked like. I think I'm the man who's going to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of what you've both given me, even if I didn't know I had it. Clara was quiet for a long moment, and Elliot held his breath, knowing that everything, his future, his happiness, his chance at redemption, hung on her next words. Theo's nap is at 1 o'clock, she said finally. If you want to start proving yourself, you can read him his 3 books and figure out how to get him to actually stay in bed. 3 books. Not 2, not 4. Never 2. Never 4. Clara's smile was tentative but real. And Elliot, if we do this, if we try again, there are no more secrets, no more separate lives. If you're Theo's father, then everyone needs to know it, including your business associates, your friends, everyone. I'm counting on it, Elliot said. I want the whole world to know that Elliot Vance's greatest achievement isn't a company or a building or a stock price. It's being chosen by you and being trusted to be his dad. As they walked home together, Theo pointing out every dog and pigeon and interesting shadow they passed, Elliot realized that for the first time in his adult life, he wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the next deal, the next crisis to solve. He was thinking about lunch and nap time, and whether 3 books might possibly become 4 if a certain little boy asked very nicely, and he couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. 2 years later, the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of the 3-bedroom apartment on 181st Street, casting golden shadows across the hardwood floors that Theo, now almost 4 years old, had recently learned to slide across in his socks. The walls were painted in warm colors filled with family photos, children's artwork, and the comfortable chaos of a life fully lived. Clara stood in the kitchen, watching through the window as Elliot pushed Theo on the tire swing they'd installed in the small backyard. Her husband's laughter mingled with their son's delighted squeals. and she found herself smiling at how natural fatherhood had become for him. "Higher, Daddy, higher," Theo called out, his dark hair, so much like Elliot's, catching the light as he soared through the air. "Hold on tight, buddy," Elliot called back, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had learned to trust himself with the most precious things in his life. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her slightly rounded belly, where their second child was growing steadily. At 4 months pregnant, she was just beginning to show, and they'd only told Theo about his future sibling a week ago. His response had been characteristically enthusiastic. "Baby sister can play with my cars." They didn't know yet if it was a girl, but Theo seemed convinced, and Clara had learned not to underestimate her son's intuition. The front door opened, and Mrs. Rodriguez entered with her usual warm smile and a container of homemade cookies. At nearly 70 now, she'd become more than a neighbor. She was family, the grandmother Theo had never had from either side. "How are my favorite people?" she asked, setting the cookies on the counter and immediately moving to peer out at the backyard scene. "Getting spoiled by their daddy," Clara replied with mock exasperation. "He promised Theo 5 minutes on the swing after homework. That was 30 minutes ago. And how is our little professor handling domestic life?" Clara grinned. Elliot's transition from Billionaire CEO to community college business instructor had surprised everyone except Clara. He'd thrown himself into teaching with the same intensity he'd once reserved for corporate mergers, and his students adored him. More importantly, his schedule allowed him to be home for breakfast, lunch, and bedtime stories, exactly what he'd promised. He loves it. Last week, one of his students started a small business using the plan they developed in class. Elliot was more excited than when he used to close million-dollar deals. "And the book?" Clara's smile widened. 6 months ago, Elliot had started writing a book about ethical business practices and work-life balance. His editor, the same one who'd published several business bestsellers, was convinced it would resonate with a generation of professionals questioning their priorities. He finished the first draft last night, stayed up until 2 a.m. because he was too excited to sleep. Mrs. Rodriguez chuckled. That man has found his purpose. Through the window, they watched Elliot finally slow the swing and lift Theo out, the little boy immediately wrapping his arms around his father's neck in an enthusiastic hug. "Story time?" Theo asked hopefully. "After dinner," Elliot replied. "Mama's been cooking something that smells amazing." As father and son headed toward the house, Clara felt the familiar flutter of contentment that had become her constant companion over the past 2 years. It hadn't always been easy. Learning to trust again, blending their lives, figuring out how to be partners in every sense of the word. But Elliot had kept every promise, small and large. The door opened, and Theo burst in with his usual energy. "Mama, Daddy pushed me so high I could see Mrs. Chen's garden." "That does sound high," Clara agreed, accepting the slightly dirty hug Theo offered. Elliot followed, his hair slightly mussed from their outdoor adventure. He'd traded his expensive suits for jeans and sweaters, his corporate polish for the relaxed confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, kissing Clara's cheek and automatically resting his hand on her growing belly. "Good. I finished the Morrison project ahead of deadline, and the baby was doing gymnastics during my 2 p.m. conference call." Clara's freelance consulting business had grown steadily over the past 2 years, helped by referrals from Elliot's former business contacts who respected his recommendation. She now had more work than she could handle and was considering hiring an assistant. "Speaking of the baby," Elliot said, his eyes lighting up, "I have news." "What kind of news?" "The kind that involves a phone call from Marcus and an offer to buy back my shares in Vance Industries." Clara stilled. In the 2 years since Elliot had walked away from his company, Marcus had successfully navigated the crisis and grown the business beyond its previous success. Elliot had seemed genuinely content with his new life, but Clara sometimes wondered if he missed the power, the influence, the rush of high-stakes decision-making. "And?" she asked carefully, and I told him I wasn't interested. Elliot's answer was immediate and definitive. "But I did suggest he consider creating a foundation focused on supporting small businesses and providing resources for work-life balance initiatives." "A foundation? With you as the head consultant if you're interested. Part-time, flexible schedule, work that actually makes a difference." Elliot grinned. Marcus loved the idea, said it was exactly the kind of initiative that could set Vance Industries apart in the industry. Clara stared at him, processing the implications. "Elliot, that's a chance for both of us to use our skills for something meaningful." while still being present for our children. He pulled her closer, careful of her belly. What do you think? Before Clara could answer, Theo tugged on Elliot's shirt. Daddy, you said story time after dinner. I did say that. What should we read tonight? The one about the elephant who learns to fly. Elliot looked at Clara over Theo's head, and she saw in his expression the same wonder she'd felt 3 years ago when she'd first told him she was pregnant. Not fear or calculation or concern about how this would affect his plans, just pure joy at the prospect of reading to his son. You know what? Clara said, answering both spoken and unspoken questions. I think that sounds perfect. As they moved through the evening routine, dinner around the small kitchen table, bath time with rubber ducks and elaborate splashing, the sacred ritual of 3 bedtime stories read in exactly the right voices, Clara marveled at how completely their lives had transformed. David had moved to Seattle 6 months after their conversation, where he'd met a kindergarten teacher who shared his love of hiking and his dreams of traveling during summer vacations. His Christmas card had included a photo of them at the Grand Canyon, both grinning with the happiness of people who'd found exactly what they were looking for. Elliot's former business associates had been shocked by his career change, but those who'd gotten to know him personally had come to understand his choice. Several had even started making their own adjustments, inspired by his example. But the real transformation was quieter, more personal. It was in the way Elliot's face lit up when Theo ran toward him at pickup time from preschool. It was in his patience during toddler meltdowns, his creativity during rainy day indoor activities, his gentle persistence when teaching Theo to tie his shoes. It was in the way he looked at Clara now, not like a secret to be protected or a problem to be managed, but like a partner, an equal, the love of his life whose happiness was as important as his own. After Theo was finally asleep, clutching his beloved peanut and surrounded by the carefully arranged stuffed animals that made him feel safe, Clara and Elliot settled onto their small couch with cups of tea. Do you ever miss it? Clara asked quietly. The company, the power, the feeling of controlling something huge. Elliot considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked about his former life. Sometimes I miss the adrenaline, he admitted, but I don't miss the emptiness. I don't miss coming home to silence or going to bed wondering if anything I'd accomplished that day actually mattered. He pulled her closer, and Clara settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, the same rhythm that had once raced with corporate anxiety, now steady with contentment. Besides, Elliot continued, I've learned that there's a different kind of power in being completely essential to the people you love. When Theo has a nightmare and calls for me, when you need someone to talk through a difficult client situation, when this little one arrives and needs us both, his hand found her belly again. That's when I feel most powerful. Even when the company stock hits record highs and gets featured on the cover of Fortune, even then, Elliot's answer carried the certainty of a man who'd tested his priorities and found them solid. Clara's success used to mean being indispensable to people who could easily replace me. Now it means being irreplaceable to people who chose to love me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of their neighborhood twinkle through the window. Somewhere in the building, a baby was crying. Next door, the Rodriguez family was having a loud but affectionate argument in Spanish. Upstairs, someone was practicing violin with enthusiastic imperfection. It was nothing like the pristine silence of Elliot's former penthouse, and Clara knew he wouldn't trade it for anything. I love you, she said quietly, the words carrying 2 years of rebuilt trust, daily choices, and small acts of devotion. I love you too, Elliot replied. Both of you. All 3 of you. As Clara drifted toward sleep that night, her last conscious thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, for the courage to trust again, for a man who'd learned that true strength meant choosing love over fear, presence over power, family over everything else that the world insisted mattered more. Some love stories begin with lightning and end with ashes. Others begin with fear and end with courage. But the best ones, Clara had learned, begin with choice. The daily, unremarkable, revolutionary choice to put love first. And this love story was just beginning. What do you believe matters more in life? The success that impresses the world or the love that transforms your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.